One of the most interesting things about this History of China course this year was not only the history, but it was how China's history was structured. You taught us about how China was separated into waves, and I found that really, really interesting. It showed how China would start off, it would make its way up, then it would crash. But the cool thing about that is that you could see how China would be able to put itself back on its feet. For instance, at the end of Wave 1 during the warring states, when China was coming crashing down, China was separated. Each state was fighting to unify China, and so they wanted the popular support of the people. So each government would have a philosopher help run its government. That's how the 100 schools of thought came to be. It was the golden age for philosophies. That's where Taoism came from, and that's where Confucianism came from. So you could see China, even though it was falling down, it was getting culturally rich. And so basically what happened was Qin Shi Huangdi was able to unify China, and he used his philosophy of legalism to create this strong central bureaucracy to help run the people. So now we know that philosophies are introduced so early within the history of China. And one thing about the history of China is that you have to pay attention to every detail, because in the history of China, patterns often occur. So if you learn something from Wave 1, you better be prepared for it to occur again in Wave 2 or 3 or 4. You have to realize that everything you learn in this course will be interesting and significant if you learn to pay attention. So philosophies would be, for me, one of the big aspects which was repeated throughout time. And mainly because philosophies, they're not only taught through scripture and through teaching, but they can be expressed in so many different ways. For instance, the 3 echoes I found was how it was expressed in art, how it was expressed in how you treated people, and it was expressed in how you run a government. These 3 things happened in all different ways. One cool thing about this is that it shows how philosophy was so ingrained into the culture since day 1 that it was able to last throughout all the history of China. In Wave 2, Han Wudi expressed how Confucianism is now the philosophy of the country, and this allowed Confucian scholars to help run the government by having a seat and actually having a say in how you should rule the country. However, when the Jing Empire took control and it was a corrupt government, these philosophers didn't want to help them govern because they were a bad ruler. So these philosophers, they decided to run away from China and hide in the bamboo groves. This is where the 7 stages of bamboo groves came from, and this is where the art in China started to boom. If you take a look at China's art, you can tell whether it be Taoist or if it's Confucian. The philosophies, they were able to express themselves through these arts. If you look at Confucian art, Confucian beliefs preached the idea of co-humanity. So you often see a lot of people harmonizing with each other, having a good time. They'd probably be playing an instrument because music was a very, very strong thing that impacted Confucian beliefs. It was one of the traits of becoming a gentleman. If you don't know how to play music, you would not be considered a gentleman. In Taoist art and poetry, it would be very different, because in Taoism beliefs, we are equivalent to the animals and the surroundings around us. We are one of 10,000 things that comprises this universe. We should not be the sole importance of this universe, because there are so many other beautiful things in the world. You'll see that it's very non-human centric. You would see a lot of trees, a lot of waterfalls, a lot of landscapes, and maybe in some rare cases you'll see a human, but they would be very small and off to the side. I was reading Tao Yuanming. His descriptors of where he was very powerful and very impactful, and it painted a very beautiful picture in my mind. So there, you can already tell how these beliefs are already impacting its way onto China's culture. So now I'm going to talk about how philosophies impacted the way we treated each other. And I felt this was really well expressed during Wave 3 in the Ming Dynasty, when Zheng He was set to take voyages out and meet other civilizations. What was really cool about learning this, is that we could compare it with the Gamon's voyages, which only occurred around 60 years later. So let's start with Zheng He. Zheng He was a Chinese Muslim eunuch with philosophical beliefs. That statement on its own, it already shows how China is so indifferent of what you practice. Being a philosophical state, they don't care about other religions. They'd much rather care about what your beliefs are, not who you believe in, but what they are. You know, how you respect others, how you treat others, what's your take on money. So now when Zheng He set his voyages out, you could see how he acted with the villagers. He showed them what China had to offer. He didn't coerce them into believing what China believes. He instead tried to transform their virtue, which epitomizes the Confucian belief of being benevolent and respectful. You know, he was very Taoist in the sense that he wasn't human-centered. He wasn't there to make China have a better outcome. He was there just to show them how to live. Like he wouldn't go there trying to be greedy. He went there to give something equal and expect something equal. You know, he wouldn't give someone a useless thing in return for lots of money. That's what the Gama tried to do. You see, the Gama comes from a Western religious-based country, and if you compare that to China's philosophical-based country, you can see that the golden rule from each of them are so different. China is very non-self-centered. It's don't treat others the way that they would not want to be treated. Whereas the religious-based country, it was treat others the way you want to be treated. So it's whether you want to be treated or don't want to be treated. As you can see, the Gama was much more self-centered. He tried to coerce them to join his religion. He tried to get the better end of the deal when it came to trading. He would give a clock and expect gold in return, and this often led to violence between the civilizations. The Gama unrightfully and unhumanely captured a pilgrim ship and killed everyone and looted the ship. It's crazy to see how a philosophy-based country compared to a religious-based country, how the teachings were, even though philosophies and religions, they are meant to make the world a better place, how the teachings were which made the country so much more different, one being humane, one being violent. Now on to how philosophies impacted Chinese government. Confucius, since day one, has been preaching that the three sage kings were the perfect example for a government. Yao, Xin, and Yu. He felt that Yao, Xin, and Yu, they respected everyone. You know, they didn't care about your stature. They didn't care if you're high class or low class. They cared of who you are as a person, and that was they were benevolent, reverent, and they tried to transform the people's virtues, and that's how they got the popular support. So even though Confucius was in wave one, his idea of a good government went from wave one, and it even lasted all the way till present time. I feel even though Mao Zedong was claimed as a monster, I feel that he was still Confucian. You know, that's why I have this communist cap right here. So now we know that I'm gonna take this off. You can't see my face. So how was Mao Zedong Confucian? Well, so as I stated before, philosophy started off when China was emerging. So philosophies, they were so into the culture that later on you started acting philosophical whether you knew it or not. You started acting Confucian, you started acting Taoist. You know, you start to live by philosophies whether you knew it or not. You know, you started to act like this. So Mao Zedong, he was a no one. He was a peasant under a corrupt government that was against communism. But he saw something special within communism. He truly believed that communism could help the people out. Okay? So when his rebellion started, he had very Confucian beliefs. People loved him because he was able to show how he would lead the country back to its top. He was able to transform the people's virtues very much like the sage kings. He was respectful to the people very much like the sage kings. He was reverent to the people very much like the sage kings. And so you could see that General Mao Zedong, he would not give up. He would not give up. He wanted the people of China to succeed. and he was able to do that. He was able to take over the Chinese government, and he was able to be instated as the ruler of China. But you have to realize that starting from being a nobody and becoming the most infamous man in China, that it has its downfalls. You know, you're finally put into this place where you have all the power in the government, and it had its impact on Mao Zedong. General Mao became a bit insane. You know, his sleeping patterns were off. He had to take sleeping pills. He made drastic decisions which made China really unstable. However, although he did cause 3 of the biggest years of famine, it was followed by many years of tranquility and many years of peacefulness. You know, so how does it weigh? I don't know. It's up to the audience, but I feel as if these years of tranquility it weighs much more than the 3 years of famine. So you can see that he had beliefs of supporting the people from day one until the day he died. He really wanted to do this for the people because he was a peasant. He knew what it was like, and he wanted to be successful for them. So and Mao Zedong, he had very strong thoughts on education and calligraphy. So you can already tell that he's Confucian. But to call him Taoist, that's a totally different story, because Taoism was very much on going with the flow, you know, of simplicity. But Mao was a Marxist, so those ideas already clash. Mao had this belief of a structured government having power over the people, whereas Taoism is very much we are all animals. We are all animals in this world. We live together as animals. The only difference between us and a dog is that we can talk. So you can see the simplicity there compared to the complex structure of how you should live your life. So Tao basically left with Mao. So final thoughts. Ever since Mao's death and Deng's rule, China started to change. Deng opened the door to let flies in. These flies stayed, unfortunately, and then China became globalized within the 2000th century, and that's when people started to come into China. That's when China started to lose its culture. So the question, are the Chinese still Chinese? I used to debate about it a lot. I used to think, well, maybe there's still philosophies still ingrained into the Chinese culture, but then I think maybe the people who entered China changed that. But then a few days ago, I saw this one video of this child, around 10 years old, who was doing this thing called contact juggling. It's not Western juggling, in which you throw chainsaws and bats and balls and vigorously move your hands up. But rather, you let this ball sit on your arm, you let it roll, and you let it go between your body. You know, it looks fake, but people say it's real, and I couldn't help but connect it to Taoism. I couldn't help but connect it to the idea of letting it flow, you know, instead of the vigorous switch of hands and doing tricks. And, in the video, you can see this kid. He was in a park, you know, and in the background you'll see other kids playing in the park, playing yo-yos and doing other things, you know, under a big tree, you know. And I couldn't help think about Confucian's co-humanity, you know. I couldn't help think about Taoist Taoist 10,000 things, you know. When will you see that in America? When will you see that in the West? People hardly go to parks anymore to look at the beauty, you know. So I think I finalized my conclusion that the Chinese, although it is dimmed down, that the Chinese still are Chinese. The reason why the history of China will impact my life so much is because it didn't only teach me about the history of China. As cheesy as it sounds, it taught me how to live my life. These Chinese philosophies, reading them, it opened my eyes into a totally different world. An example is like, 10th grade, okay? I used to have this best friend since 7th grade up until last year, you know. He was really cool, and the odd thing about him was that he was popular. Although he was popular, he was very respectful to the other kids, you know, he was around, you know. He didn't want to fit in with the jocks, you know. He had this really weird thing about him where he would fit in with everyone. But then over summer, he started the wanting of becoming a stereotypical popular kid, you know. Someone who's into lust over love, someone who's into drinking on the weekends, someone who breaks the rules, you know. And I confronted him about this. I messaged him, you shouldn't be hitting on freshman girls, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol, you know, you're part of this student council body, you know, what does this show? And then his retaliation to that was just not messaging me. He just stopped all communications with me. Then I started to think that maybe I was too harsh on him. Maybe I should have given him a chance. Maybe it's because that's what all kids are doing and that's what all kids should start doing. But then, so I started to doubt myself. I started to think that I was in the wrong. And then you introduced me to Taoist philosophy. And I said the quote before, but I'm going to say it again. A great sage becomes great because he doesn't attempt to be one, you know? And so I realized, although he may be popular now, he's not a great sage because he wanted to fit in. He wanted to become like everyone else, you know? Now he's just losing his personality, and it's his fault, it's not mine. I'm not going to take the blame for it, screw him. So yeah, you're probably going to be watching this far after final review day, so I'm going to say thank you, Mr. Burrell, for introducing me to this rich culture with rich ideas and rich philosophies, which will help people live their life. Realize that what you're doing is more than teaching a class, but it's actually teaching people how to live. That became super cheesy, super fast. Alright, thank you.